All right, folks, we're going to be working on installing Visual Studio. This is the spring of 2023, and I do have in Unit 1 some install instructions, including a little warning to wait before you install Visual Studio because we are doing it in the Zoom pop-up here today on January 19th at 4 p.m. Actually, it's 4:30 now, but um, the version of Visual Studio that is installed on any of the school equipment, right? So, and we were saying this just a few minutes ago, our labs are all configured to 2019. And I think if you went out into the field, most working professionals are probably using that one too. Um, Visual Studio versions typically match up with major Windows operating system upgrades. Visual Studio 2022 is the version of Visual Studio that they use to build Windows 11. And every time they release a major version of Windows, there is a major version of Visual Studio that goes with it. So what this tells you about Visual Studio as a product is this is the tool Microsoft uses to develop their operating systems. And that's really pretty significant in terms of the concept of all of what we're doing. Now, the libraries that we're going to be working with in this class have nothing to do with operating systems or Windows native applications. So in other words, we're not going to be writing applications that are going to run inside of Windows. But with Visual Studio, you can create Windows executables, right? And that's one of the primary points of it. What we're going to be building are websites that have a back-end programming language, which will be the same one that Microsoft uses for OS development, which is C Sharp. That's their primary language these days. But ASP.NET is a web technology, so it's going to have this combination of front-facing web components, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and the ASP.NET scripting language also. And then on the back end, it will have programming code that'll be a combination of C Sharp, could be other backend languages, it could be SQL code. It can also make database connections like PHP and MySQL does. Um, but because it's C Sharp, C Sharp is a language that, unlike PHP, needs to be compiled in order to run. So when you build an ASP.NET project and you hit the build button or the run button, it actually writes an executable that does the server side code and then deploys it in an internal web server so you can see the results. So this is kind of a combination of front end and back end programming. ASP.NET is really heavily used in corporate and institutional environments where they are heavily steeped in the Microsoft ecosystem, meaning they're running Office 365 and Exchange email and SQL Server databases and Active Directory and have Windows servers and file shares and things like that. It is, super in demand, for example, like at corporations like Uline, like Uline Corporation, which is right in our back door. They have a lot of C Sharp development going on for their web products because all their databases are on Microsoft. If you look at the web world in general, the web world in general mostly runs on Linux and open source software and uses the Apache web server. And most development is done with PHP as a back end language instead of C Sharp. And the database is MySQL. So a majority of the world's websites run on that technology. However, in corporate America, where a lot of the good paying jobs are, .NET and C Sharp is the platform. Right? Both of them can create really powerful websites. There are some advantages to using a compiled language on the back end. The main one being that once the thing is compiled as a binary, an executable, it runs much faster than an interpreted language like PHP or JavaScript, where the commands are executed one at a time. A compiled language is actually more efficient, and so it creates a little bit more power on the back end. So it gets into a really deep conversation, but ultimately, what I'm going to suggest here for you guys is to select this very specific version of Visual Studio. Let me take you to the Visual Studio homepage. So I'm just going to do a search, Visual Studio, and we'll go right to Microsoft here and take a look at the page. And so notice that they have a family of products. So let's go back to what we said before. So I was asked, I should uninstall Visual Studio Code? And I'm like, no, that's a standalone product. It is part of the family of products you're noticing here, but Visual Studio Code is anomalous for Microsoft in that they wrote something that really is much more akin to Notepad++, for example, which is a tool that can code in just about any languages. It's open source, so that means people can freely contribute improvements, plugins, add language features to it, and it happens quite a bit. So that's why Visual Studio Code is so popular. And if you notice from the little icons, it also runs on all the platforms. So it's Windows, Mac, Linux, it doesn't care. It'll work on all of them. And because of that, especially on non-Windows platforms, it has become kind of the de facto go-to tool for coding. And if you ever write code, like for example, like if you write Java code inside of Visual Studio Code, it'll notice that you're doing Java and it'll say, hey, you should install all these plugins so you can get a console and do all the stuff that you normally would do. Also notice that there's a version for Macintosh. The one unfortunate thing with Macintosh is it uses different sets of libraries, so you're not really necessarily writing stuff that's going to run on the Macintosh operating system natively like you would if you were coding in Objective-C, which is the parent language for Macintosh. But they're making inroads here. So the fact that they even made a Mac version is really telling of where Microsoft is going, because the underlying operating system of the Macintosh is Unix, which is related to Linux. So that's a really big move forward. Unfortunately, the libraries that we use for web development do not operate on the Macintosh. So Mac is off the table. However, if you want to code on the Mac, using Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code is a great option, right? Because a lot of the IDEs that are available for Mac are sometimes really, frankly, very limited. So I was very excited. This is my Visual Studio Code's my default coding tool on the Macintosh, if you're curious. On the Windows side, we're confronted with kind of a few different issues here. So here's kind of one of the issues we're running into right away is they're pushing out the most recent version. And because they're pushing that out, I think I'm going to encourage you guys to do this, is to go with 2022. If you really want to find an older version, I'm sure that we can probably dig into their page here and probably, see, I'm scrolling here. And I'm not saying, we could probably just Google it and they probably have a spot where you can get the older versions if you really, really want to do that. So I was going to try to push you to 2019, but because they're recommending 2022 here, I'm going to recommend that for you too. Now there's 3 different versions available here. Professional, Enterprise are the paid versions of the software. If you download them from here, and you notice the little hover I have, so it says free for individual developers, academic users, and open source. To the community version, and that's the one I'm going to have you install, and I'll explain why in a minute. The professional version and the enterprise, you notice it says free trial. So it's like 30 days or 60 days or something, and then the bill comes. And by the way, folks, the bill is not cheap. This is like, well, I'm not sure what the actual buy price is these days. If you buy it for an organization, you're usually going to buy hundreds of copies or thousands of copies, and you get a discount. But if you buy it as an individual, I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of about $1,000 for the product. And I might be wrong, but that's the neighborhood of the price for this. Now, there are ways to get professional and enterprise. In fact, I think I saw it was just enterprise through the Azure cloud infrastructure. And I'll show you guys how to get here, but this is not really the key part of today's session. But once you're logged into the Azure cloud, and all of our Gateway students have access to this, by the way, you can go to their software area and you can look for Visual Studio. And when you look for that, you'll notice that the enterprise version is available to you for free, right? Now, why do I push you to do the community version? There's 2 reasons. First of all, the community version has all the same features as professional and enterprise. The difference between enterprise and professional is basically some of the team tools. So like if you're working with a team of coders, there's some special collaboration tools in there. That's the only upgrade. Community then is essentially exactly the same as professional. And If you download Community, the way that you activate it is you log in with any of your Microsoft accounts. So if you have an Xbox account, if you have an Outlook Mail account, or an Office 365 account, or whatever kind of Microsoft account you have, maybe the one that you log into Windows with, that is all you need to unlock the product. And more importantly, it stays free forever. So my thinking is, why would you go to the trouble of getting professional and then when your .edu thing goes away, then that expires and you can't access it anymore? Not very helpful. Microsoft never used to offer a community version, but there's a lot of pressure from the open source community, which has kind of been beating up Microsoft, real frankly, that they start releasing their source code and giving away their software for free because it reinvigorates the platform. So it gets people excited about Windows development. But the truth is, you can develop just about anything in this product, with the exception of stuff for the Mac OS. For whatever reason, Mac, the Mac people kind of have that all sewn up. So if you're on this page, I would encourage you to just come in here, click on Community, and download it. And what I'm going to do here is I'll just pause the video really quick. Thing. So if you're really kind of pensive about doing the latest version of Visual Studio, they do have the older versions available here. So here's the URL up on top here. So I just simply searched Visual Studio 2019 and I got to this page. So if you want to do 2019 instead, and the reason that you would want to do this, here's the reason, is because the videos in the core shell that I have are mostly 2017 and 19, and so your screens will match more exactly. From what I've seen in 2022, those screens are pretty much the same, but there might be a couple of differences. So if you guys who are here in the Zoom session right now would rather do this, here comes the URL in the chat. So you can just click on that. All right. So again. So I had the video paused for a moment and I was just kind of making sure where this goes because I want to make sure that you guys get the free version. But if you click download, you end up here, and then you can click on 2019 and then you end up here. And then the version you want to grab is the community version. That's the one that stays free. And notice, no key required. All you need to do is basically log in with any Microsoft account. And that's the price of admission. Now, what I want to kind of do, and I'm hoping that one of you is game to do this, is I already have the product installed. So for me to demonstrate installation is kind of like, well, I have to uninstall and reinstall and do all that, and it's kind of silly. What I would prefer is if one of you here in the session would be willing to share their screen, and I'll record that as the installation demonstration. Peter, I know you were pretty good about it last night. Would you be game on doing it again?
You want me to share my screen?
Yeah, if you don't mind, that would be really helpful.
Sure.
I'm going to pause here for a moment while we get that going. All right, so one of our students here, we're looking at Kathleen's screen right now. And Kathleen, you were kind of following along with me, and then you made it to this screen, right?
Yes. Is this the right screen?
Almost.
Okay.
At the top of the window there, it says downloads. Can you click on that?
Okay.
And then on the left, if you're going to do 2019, which is probably the recommended version for this class, you can do 2022
okay.
if you wish, but the 19 version will match up better with the video. So click on that
Gotcha.
one.
Okay.
And then from here, well, it's the third one down. You want to grab the community edition.
Okay.
Oops. All right. And then this goes really, really quick, by the way. Unlike the old days where you would spend an hour downloading the files and then unzipping and then running the install. But Kathleen, yeah, you just launch a little installer and that kind of does most of the rest. Go ahead and click continue. And this little tool works pretty quickly. I'm very impressed with the changes that they've made. And frankly, Microsoft has done a really good job even with like installing Office now. That used to be one of those that took a long time too. All right. So now you've installed the installer, which is kind of funny to think about that way.
See, something just popped up.
You
Oh,
probably
my
got a
computer
little,
froze. Oh no. Okay, there you go.
there you go. All right. This is the screen, Peter, where you were at just a few minutes ago. And here's where it becomes really important that you make the right choices on the screen. So what I'm doing here, and I'm probably going to have to exit full screen here for just a moment. And then I'm going to pull up the course shell on the other screen because you'll notice that I have this little graphic here. I'm going to pull that off to screen number 2. If you were
Do
smart,
you
you'll
want
just
me
pause the
to
video.
stop sharing?
No, no, no. Please,
Okay.
please keep sharing. I'll walk you through.
Okay.
All right, so here we are back to Kathleen's screen. So some of the tools that we need to install are very specific to particularly what we're doing. And one of the reasons why I do this, because I do get those students like, hey, I'm going to install everything, right? And I try to warn you about this in my announcements. When you do that, the installation gets huge. It gets so huge, it can easily reach like 100, 120 gigs. You know, when you install everything that Visual Studio can do, that which is an insane amount of disk space when some people only have like a 256 gig hard drive, for example. Notice right now with the default selections, it's only 884 megabytes. Down, it's in the bottom right corner of your screen here. Right above the install button, it says how much space it's going to take. But now we need to add the tools that we need. All right, so we do need the ASP.NET and web development. That's what this is all about, honestly. If you're curious, you know, and I don't know if you expect to write any more Python code, this does Python, you could turn that on. Not obliged, you can always add it after the fact. We will be doing a little bit of Node.js in this class, so you need the Node.js option. I also recommend that you add the .NET desktop development because it gives us the full Windows runtime libraries at our disposal. And I also recommend the universal Windows platform development. I do want you to notice if you wanted to like code in C++, all of those libraries are available too. Also notice that Unity is available in the gaming area, and the C++ game development tools are there. We're not using those, but hey, if you ever take, you know, or delve into that field, this product can do it. Down at the
Those aren't
bottom,
necessary to add, just
correct.
if we want to.
You got it.
Okay.
Additionally, at the bottom, I do suggest that you add data storage and processing, and then Office and SharePoint development. The other piece, and I'll be real frank, this is optional. I have it listed as required on the screen in the course shell, is the cross-platform development tools. So you could turn that on or off. If you look right now at your right above your install button, you'll notice that you're taking only 20 gigs of space. So my estimate was fairly good. But there are a bunch of other things that you can throw in here. And even beyond this default set of tools that Microsoft bundles in, you can also go out and get other third-party tools, but those can be added after the fact. And Visual Studio's got a super rich set of built-in library and package installers, you know, is really what we call it. So like when you need a very specific tool to do a very specific function, you can go into the library, search it, find the right version. And for example, we will do that with jQuery. So when we add jQuery to a project, we can tunnel in there and not only add jQuery, but add whichever version we want. We can, you know, get very, very specific. And so Visual Studio is outstanding in that way. All right, so you have all the selections made. Now I want you to notice at the bottom right corner, it says install while downloading, which is what you want. Otherwise, if you choose the other option, you download and then install, I like this option better because it goes so much faster. So go ahead and just click install and it'll get going, Kathleen. And then it'll give you kind of this progress meter. Um,
Hmm.
oh,
Uh-oh.
okay. Just say continue. Don't worry about that.
Okay.
Okay, we have a question.
Can
Um,
I?
Sure, Peter, go ahead. Go ahead and share.
Okay,
I'll stop sharing my screen.
I am doing the 2022 version, and some options are not the same.
All right, let's take a look just to make sure.
I know the cross-platform down in other tool sets is not here,
Okay.
and then I forgot what you selected in desktop and mobile. But I think this is similar because it's also mobile. It's just called something else, I think.
Yeah,
This,
that's kind of a neat, a new one, because this one, the one that you clicked on there, allows you to actually build apps for other operating systems. Now, I don't know if that's something you really want to toy around with at this point. You can add this after the fact, but notice like some of the differences in what you selected here. Look at the gigabyte requirement in your bottom right corner is
yeah, I added
about
other
double.
things. I have space, it's fine.
Yeah,
So,
and you know what? Hey, if you have the space and you're willing to give it a shot, you can always remove the stuff if it takes up too much room.
okay, I just wanted to make sure with the, how was it, the cross-platform? HTML and CSS and JavaScript was an option, so.
Yeah, that one that you pointed out under desktop and mobile, the .NET multi-platform one, that's kind of its replacement.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Mhm.
So,
And I don't know if you're noticing, but it says multi-platform app UI development, meaning it's a graphical tool for designing, you know, stuff for mobile phones and tablets and operating systems. Now, if you ever functionally run into any problems where you're asked to do something in Visual Studio and you're like, I don't have that, you can re-invoke this installer very, very simply. In fact, you can do it right from the start menu and add the components you're missing. In most cases, you're usually adding individual libraries, but you know, the part I'm more concerned with, Peter, is if you scroll up on the left part there, yeah, that you have .NET and Node, those are absolutely required.
Okay.
All right.
so my situation is even worse. So I installed it, but it didn't ask me any of those feature about any of those feature.
Mohammed, you're using school equipment, right?
Yeah.
Could you share your screen really quick?
Yep.
Because I'm thinking you already have it installed.
Oh, I wish so. Okay.
Right? Well, yeah, I would wish that for you too. Go to your start menu, please,
Okay.
and just start typing Visual Studio or scroll down, either one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
don't type VS, type yeah, there you go.
There you
Yeah, see,
go.
it's already installed.
I think that's the one I installed it. Okay, let's open it.
Yeah, you wouldn't have been able to install it this quickly. Yeah, so you're all set.
So how can I make sure? Oh, what is this?
Yeah, so here, actually, Mohammed, this is great that you're on this screen. And notice what it says here, your evaluation period has ended. Please sign in to unlock the product. When you guys first sign into or first launch the product, it will ask you to sign in to the product. This is where you would enter your Microsoft account. So for example, for me, I use one of my personal email addresses to unlock the product. Not a school one, but a personal one.
Okay. Should I
Now,
sign in?
well, do you have a Microsoft account, Mohammed?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead and sign in. And then whatever way you sign in, there you go. All right. You have to put in the code that they just emailed you.
I just did it once before that. 25. 77. Yeah.
And folks, that's pretty much all it takes to unlock it. If you ever sit down And this is really helpful to know. If you ever sit down at anybody else's computer that has Visual Studio installed and you sign out of their account and sign into yours, you can access the product on somebody else's machine as well. Doesn't necessarily give you all the files, but if you connect up your GitHub account, that's a possibility here too, and you use GitHub as your online repository, that all is available. So Mohammed, you're fine.
Okay, so how can I make sure that I have ASP.NET and all the other feature?
All right,
Okay, good.
see where it says continue without code? This just opens the product. And I'm trying to recall here, I think you just go up to, oh, it might just be under the help menu. So just, I apologize for not remembering off the top of my head. So just click on help.
Register product.
No, you don't need to do that. Try the tools menu.
SQL.
Oh, you know, I'm being kind of silly here. Go to your start menu and find Visual Studio in the app list. So just scroll all the way down. Nope, not that way. Just click on start again.
Okay. All right.
Scroll down to the V area. Keep going. All right. And in the Visual Studio 2019 folder, or actually just a little, see where it says Video Studio Installer? Down a couple.
This one.
Yep, that brings up the same interface we were just looking at.
Oh,
It might ask you to close Visual Studio, but you'll see the same screen that we were seeing before. Right. And notice you have a bunch of different versions on here, but what you would do, for example, if you were changing the community version, you could click modify. Or if you're using the professional version, click modify. Just choose one of those. It doesn't really matter which one.
Can I use the professional version?
Absolutely. Why not? It's on the machine.
Okay, modify. Let's go professional.
Yes,
Okay.
go ahead and click modify. And then when you're in here, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. This is our same screen.
Yes.
Okay. And notice that stuff is missing.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's good to do the, you don't need Azure, but you do need Node.js.
Okay, Python. Are we gonna work with Python?
No, not at all.
Okay.
You do need the .NET desktop.
Yeah. C++.
That's not needed.
Not needed. Okay.
You know what? If it's already clicked, it's already there, so you don't have to unclick it.
Oh, okay. Then what else? This one platform.
Yeah, you could use that one.
Windows,
That one needs to be there too. You could do mobile too if you wanted.
Mobile too.
Not the C++ one, the other one.
The other one is C++ too.
No, it's not.
This one?
Nope. Data storage and processing is important. That gives us all our database tools.
Okay.
Yeah, Office and SharePoint and cross-platform if you wish, but that's not really necessary.
If it's not necessary. Okay, what about this last .NET?
You can actually skip them, Mohammed, honestly. But Office and SharePoint, I think you want to have that one in there because it gives us a couple things.
Okay, and none of these two?
You don't need those. Scroll up a little bit.
Mobile development with .NET?
If you wish, you could add that. That's the plugin that you add when you do the mobile programming class. I don't know if you guys have had that class yet or not, I would assume.
Yeah, I had it.
All right, and then you just go ahead and click modify. Now, because you're using a school machine, Mohammed, just say yes. There's a possibility that you might not be able to do the install. I'm just letting you know.
Oh my God. I
But
think I
it's doing it.
installed,
Okay, so don't
yeah,
complain.
I think I installed couple bunch of app before. I think it would let me, I don't know. I think they unlocked it for me because every time I was getting different issue and they said, you know what,
Yeah.
man, go ahead and do what you want.
You know, very interestingly, I've been told that they have been starting to give out unlocked machines now, but you also can't print from them and do things like that. But I'm going to take the screen back, you guys. And I think that you guys are probably all well underway at this point, and I'll get the Zoom stuff off the screen so our privacy is not compromised on the internet when I publish this. Peter and Kathleen, I assume that your progress meters are probably still going. Either one of you done already?
No,
No, I'm at like 47%.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. Why don't we do this? It's 5:04 right now. I have another 25 and a half minutes or whatever before my other class begins that overlapped our original session. And what I will basically talk about now is like, what do you do when you're up and running to make sure it's working, right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up Visual Studio here on my end. And I have not launched it on this machine probably since summer. It's kind of weird to admit that, but during the fall semester, I didn't need Visual Studio at all, so I didn't even touch the school machine. It's just been collecting dust, which, Peter, is why I needed to reactivate Windows and everything. But I'm going to go ahead and just bring up Visual Studio. And you can see I have 20.
Do we need the textbook for this course?
There is a textbook for this course, which is listed in the course shell.
Are we gonna, do we need it to work with it?
You absolutely 100% need it.
Yeah, I just received it today. That's I was
Okay.
wondering if it was expensive. I was wondering if we don't need it.
Oh my, did you pay full price for it?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that, because what I would recommend with this one is that
Oh,
you find a
used one.
find a used one.
Yeah.
And you'll notice in the syllabus when you get there that there's actually two versions and you can use either version.
I don't think they had the used one, but if I mean, I wasn't careful. Otherwise, I could get it on eBay or something probably.
Yeah,
more
that's
cheaper.
possible.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't mind, I'd like to kind of focus more on this topic right now really quickly, and we can
Yes,
talk
sir.
about the book outside the video. But when you launch Visual Studio, and I could have swore I had 2022 on here, but maybe I have both and I'm just kind of being silly about it and not really looking. So let's see. Yeah, I do have Visual Studio 2022. I'm actually going to close it and make sure I launch that version. So this might answer another question that you have. Can you have multiple versions? Well, the answer apparently is yes, right? You will see that when this launches. Okay, the splash screen's different, but you know what? The initial dialogue is basically the same. How do you kind of do like basically what the chapter 1 activity is going to be for this, which is to kind of very quickly build a website, launch it, and take a look. And that's what I'm going to demonstrate right now. At this screen, usually what you're going to do is you're going to either open something you've already been working on, which may pop up on the list here, or you're just going to open a local folder. More common when you're doing website work where we don't have this SLN file, which is called the solution file, or just create a new project. You can always go right into the IDE, skipping these screens if you wish, and then just do it retroactively. That works fine too. I'm going to go ahead and click new, create new project. And then you kind of get this series of prompts basically that try to direct you to all the tools and libraries that you need to build a project. Now, you'll notice this is a lot different than some of, like, let's say, the hand coding of Java that we used to do, right? Here, I want you to notice that they have all these like libraries of different types of projects you can put together, and then these little boxes here are indicating what libraries and assets are being added to the project that you need to have available in order to operate that application or code for it. And I'm just kind of scrolling through here, and I want to see lots of different languages. C# and Visual Basic are the common ones, but this is a long scroll bar. It just keeps going and going and going and going and going and going, right? What we are doing here is we're coding for the web. So one thing that you can do is like you can pick by language, you can choose by platform, right? Or project type, you know, so you have all these different things, and those help to kind of narrow it down. So I'm going to choose web, and right away you're going to see the .NET Core stuff. The .NET Core stuff is that library that apparently has been deprecated now, so that's not the one that we're using. Notice they have ones with Angular built in, with React, et cetera, et cetera. But we are going to use the C# language, so I'm going to filter for C#. And this is the option that we're going to use. I'm not going to say exclusively for this course, but it is the one that mimics what we have in our book. Of course, you can always explore the others at any point in time, but this is our primary template for a project template that we're going to use. So notice it's ASP.NET web application. It's using the C# language on the back end and the .NET framework. So if you select that, you just click next, and then you name your project, and you can call it, hey, whatever, you know, just to be kind of snarky about it. You can also choose to name a solution file. That is not necessarily obligatory for web stuff. But notice they say place the solution and project in the same directory. And for web stuff, I usually recommend that. So I'm just going to make the little checkbox there. And then you can also choose your .NET framework. And what that refers to is which Windows libraries are sitting underneath that you're publishing to that are compiling your code. So in some cases, if you're publishing to old platforms, you would choose an older framework. Generally speaking, you usually go for the most modern one, although sometimes they have the most modern one in there and it's not quite stable yet, which is why it's reverting to 4.72. So that's like the most recent that's considered stable. That's why it came up by default. So that's what I would recommend. You would click create, and then you can make a bunch of additional choices here, and they're screen after screen like this, which is kind of interesting. Most of the time when we're building stuff in class, we'll often start with an empty template. In other cases, we might, like when we had a ASP.NET 2 class, we pretty much would do everything in MVC or API, sometimes the single page application approach. In this case, you know, I think I'm still going to go with an empty project. So it really doesn't have any content in there. But maybe for the sake of demonstration, let's do web forms, or I'll do web forms. With a drop-down box, you can set it up to authenticate people, so you can create an automatic login, and notice you can either create individual accounts. You can use Microsoft's sign-in systems, the same system we use to sign into Visual Studio, by the way, or you can piggyback off of the internal Windows login system. So you could tie it to your username and password already on Windows. In this case, I don't want any authentication, but if I was to choose one, I would probably do individual accounts for most websites, by the way. It'll ask you to add a bunch of different folders and stuff that are normal, you know, and it depends on the kind of project you're doing. We're not going to do something MVC right off the bat. They also have this little box for configuring for secure websites. Normally, if you were doing a real website, you would turn this on, but for schoolwork, I'm going to turn it off. You can also add Docker support if you have Docker on your system. That's a whole separate topic too. And it also allows to add unit testing components, which is to code that tests your code, by the way. We're not going to add that either. Then you just go ahead and click create. And then what you'll notice is it will basically take all the libraries that it needs, add them to the project, create the folder structure with the names that and selections that you chose. And right off the bat, we have a website that not only has a bunch of stuff created. I want you to have a look at all the files that were just automatically created. It's a lot of files, right? And it's a little bit overwhelming at first, and you'll notice, hey, I don't see any HTML files is probably the first thing you're going to say, because when you do ASP.NET, the file extension is going to be ASPX. That is indicating that it's a .NET ASP application. If you see a website that just has .ASP, that's the old version of ASP, which is the scripting language, more like PHP or JavaScript. ASPX indicates .NET on the back end, usually C#, but could be Visual Basic. Also notice there's no index file, so it's not index.html or index.aspx. The default homepage is called default, right? And I want you to notice there's a default, a contact, and an about. I didn't build any of that stuff, right? It just was there. Even more interestingly, there's a bunch of like folders with assets, and there's like fonts and scripts and content and all sorts of like weird stuff here, none of which we manually added, but are all important for the application running. So one thing that you'll learn when you're working with these frameworks is you let the tool build out the project structure and then you add to it, right? You would never be creating this from scratch, right? So there's a lot of kind of like automation built into it. Now, we do actually have a full website already here, right? The default page, and you can click in there and actually start seeing the code in there if you want. And you'll notice some stuff that looks like HTML, because it is, and some stuff that's not, right? And so when we get into the course, you'll kind of see that. But if you wanted to get this website up and running, you can actually very simply go up to the toolbar here and hit the run button. And I want you to notice here that this is going to use its internal web server. So Visual Studio has its own web server built in. That's called IIS. That stands for Internet Information Services. And it's the Express version. So that's the one in the product. Some Windows systems, usually servers, most laptops and personal computers don't do this, will also have just regular IIS, which is Microsoft's version of a web server. And that one we really kind of want to avoid at this point unless you have that configured, which is rare. So use the internal one. And then it also has figured out that Google Chrome is my default browser and is going to build and launch. It's going to build a web server, launch our product by compiling the code on the back end, and then push it into Chrome, all with one click. Now, the very first time you launch it, it takes a little bit of time, okay? So because it's got to do all those tasks. And then you notice, well, I guess not that long on my machine. So just give it a second here as it loads up and builds the code on the back end. Of course, and there it is. So I don't know if you guys are getting this. Here's the website I just created by basically doing nothing. Right. And so now, as you kind of look back to maybe your first day of your very first web class, like, Web Programming 1 or Web Programming, whichever one you took, and all the rigmarole that you had to go through to create a website just to get it up and running. And here, with really a minimal amount of clicks, just the right selections from the screen, I've created a website that is fully functional. It has Bootstrap as a template for CSS. So if you know Bootstrap, you can call upon its features. It gives you a home page, an about page, and a contact page. Why? Because those are really common on websites. Of course, can I click on them and go see what's there? Sure, there it is. There's my about page. There's my contact page. There's nothing really in there, but it is actually there, right? So it's just a matter of tweaking it at this point. The other thing that I have people do with that very first exercise is, once you get in here, and you should be in this habit as a web developer, frankly. You're on a website, you want to see how it clicks. Let's right click and view source and take a look at the code on the back end that's creating this, right? So I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. So you will see that even though the code that we were looking at in the IDE was kind of like this weird ASP stuff with a couple of HTML tags. In the output, we see code that, first of all, we didn't write, right? And secondly, is in standard HTML format. So it's a HTML5 file. It's got all the standard things that we need. It's got already connected some JavaScript, a couple different CSS files, a favorite icon is already declared, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then as you scroll down the page and you see all these like fancy things, and then eventually you get to like where the actual page content is. And this is not generated by us, all auto-generated by the template that publishes it. So the other thing that you'll notice is this is actually a really common template that's used. In fact, a lot of people that are just pushing out web pages quickly, they just use this template, add a couple things, tweak it, add their content, photos, images, and words, and they have a website and it's up and running, and it's up and running really quickly. Now, of course, when you wanted to do something specific, that's where, you know, the expertise comes in, which is why we're taking this class, so you learn what those things are. What's happened on the back end, which I think is, you know, kind of revelatory. So like right now, this is still running. And as this is running as a web server here, it's showing all the stuff that's kind of happening on the front end and monitoring it. So this is kind of like a diagnostic tool that monitors the actual web server that's running and the product that's pushing out the content. I am going to hit the stop button, so that will stop the server from running. And then we can actually, like, if you're looking at like our default page, the one that we, you know, the home page, you'll notice there's a little expander arrow here where there's the ASP file. That's the one that we're looking at here. And then there's also a C# file. This is the backend programming code. So it's got a structure in here. I hope you're noticing, but there's no real code. But if I wanted my web page to do something programmatic, you know, do some math, capture content from a form and feed it to a database, etc., that code would be here. This code, when I hit that run button, is what gets compiled by Windows, turned into an executable, and then runs as an executable behind the website to power it. So a lot of stuff going on in the background here that makes it essentially look like it's really easy, right? And the quick building of a website is, but then getting the content in there and having it do stuff, that's where the skill and the artistry really comes in. The one other thing I will tell you about Visual Studio, very much like a product like Dreamweaver, and I'm trying to click the design button here, so it's taking a second to load up. It does have a visual mode, which is really pretty interesting. And this visual mode, however, is not like the one in Dreamweaver. So if I have any like Dreamweaver people here, like if you're used to coding in that platform, where the visual that you're looking at inside of Dreamweaver really is almost the exact same thing you're seeing in the browser. ASP.NET inside of Visual Studio does not operate that way. It's gotten better over the years, but it's not quite the same thing. All right, I'm going to actually stop recording the video now because I am